Homage to fundamental teacher Buddha Shakyamuni. Homage to wisdom warrior Manjushri. Homage to all lineage benevolent masters. The Dharma, infinitely profound and subtle, is rarely encountered even in 1,000,000 eons. Now we are able to hear, study, and follow it. May we fully realize Tathagata's true meaning. In order to liberate all sentient beings from samsara, generate supreme bodhicitta. Now we will teach the words of my perfect teacher. In the words of my perfect teacher, we are currently teaching mandala offerings. The main focus here is accumulating merit. Now let's discuss mandala offerings. Previously, we introduced how merit from past lives is very important and mainly explained this principle. Next, it says that in today's times, in some poor and remote places, when people see someone with even a little wealth or status, they exclaim loudly, "Guru knows how amazing this person is, making such a big fuss." Actually, in our current worldly affairs, this also happens frequently. For example, not just in small poor places, even in some large countries when someone has wealth, like internationally, such as Bill Gates, Buffett, and so on, they find it very amazing, or like Li Ka-shing, these people. Actually, from the worldly perspective of some individuals, their amazement and praise is quite understandable because they themselves don't have such merit. But on the other hand, if we look through history, those who currently possess great wealth are not necessarily particularly amazing. Actually, if one encounters an excellent field of merit and maintains a pure heart, reaching such levels doesn't require accumulating vast merit. For example, in history, King Mandhatri in his causal ground. Previously, or we could say in his causal ground, when he was accumulating merit, once made an offering of 7 peas, and as a result, later ruled all realms below the 33 heavens. This story seems to have been told before. It's in the Sutra of the Wise and the Foolish. Once when Buddha Pusya came to the world to turn the Dharma wheel and went to the city, at that time there were several children. There are 2 versions of this story. One version says there was a Brahmin's son. At that time, he was preparing to go to another household that was preparing for a celebration to visit them. On the way, he saw Tathagata Pusya had come into the world and was collecting alms. At this time, he originally had some peas in his hand. These peas were meant to be scattered on the bride according to Indian tradition as a blessing. It seems that in Han regions now, there are also flower blessings and setting off firecrackers. Setting off firecrackers should be a ritual for driving away demons. Scattering flowers is for blessings. At that time, many balloons were placed on the car. When the balloons touch something, they pop and immediately burst. It's a kind of symbol. There are many, many more. At that time, India also had this tradition. So he originally intended to see the bride preparing to scatter peas, holding a handful of peas. As a result, on the way, he saw the Tathagata's excellent and majestic appearance and developed great faith and joy. Then immediately made an offering to him. At that time, 4 peas fell into his bowl and 2 peas touched and fell to the ground. Through this merit, of course, this was due to the particularly excellent object of offering. At that time, through the merit of 4 peas, he later ruled the entire 4 continents, becoming King Mandhatri, historically the first wheel-turning king. Then, through the merit of 2 peas, he ruled the 33 heavens and the 4 great heavenly kings. Therefore, we cannot treat small merits as insignificant. If you plant small virtues in good merit fields, you will surely receive rewards later. This should be taught in the Miscellaneous Treasures Sutra. If a small virtue root encounters a good field, encounters a particularly excellent merit field, then it will definitely receive particularly great results. So in this sutra, it also teaches one should diligently create all merits. Do not have inferior thoughts about small virtues. This means one should use a diligent mind to create all merits. Do not think that small virtues are inferior or without virtue. Also, the story I just told from the Sutra of the Wise and the Foolish is slightly different from what's said in the Sutra on the Causes and Conditions of King Mandhatri. The Sutra on the Causes and Conditions of King Mandhatri is actually when King Prasenajit requested to hear about King Mandhatri's past karmic connections. The Buddha said at that time, King Prasenajit is King Prasenajit. Earlier in the Sutra of the Wise and the Foolish, it seems Ananda made the request. At that time, the Buddha explained his karmic connections in this Sutra on Causes and Conditions. It says, once, when Buddha Vipassina appeared in the world, there was a merchant leader. The following plot is basically the same. Also, when he encountered the Tathagata, he developed joyful faith, then offered mung beans. In that text, it seems to mention mung beans. Mung beans and peas are about the same, right? He offered 4 that fell into the bowl, and 1 seemed to hit the alms bowl and fell to the ground. And at that time, he also made this aspiration. Through this vast cause of generosity, may I attain Buddha's natural wisdom in the world. May I quickly transcend the stream of birth and death and liberate all those the previous Buddhas have not liberated. He made this aspiration. Actually, we often recite this Jin Pagyachen Gepa de Yeti, Trovo Nangne Rangjin Sangyesho Vense Gyawa Namji Majapwo Jegededa Yin Pitrojeki. There is also this verse in Tibetan. We usually recite this verse in burnt offering rituals and many other rituals. Sometimes when we make any offering or generosity. At this time, if we really find it difficult to recite other prayers like King of Aspiration prayers, then recite this verse, which means through this vast cause of generosity, may I attain the natural wisdom of Buddha in the world, and after gaining such wisdom, may I quickly transcend the cycle of birth and death, and may all sentient beings that many previous Tathagatas were unable to liberate be completely liberated through my majestic power and wisdom. Making this aspiration, after he made this aspiration, it was the same. The subsequent process, he also experienced such results. At that time, in the celestial realm, he sat as equal to the heavenly king. The Buddha said at that time, if the mung beans he offered had not fallen to the ground, actually he could have obtained the position of heavenly king. But because at that time his mung beans fell to the ground, he did not receive the heavenly king's reward, but sat equally with the heavenly king and enjoyed such rewards. So when we make offerings in general, at this time we should still handle them properly. This is also very important. So here it explains that actually, looking simply at history, for example, those in our current world who are particularly blessed with merit. Some people see this boss has so much money, this person has so much. Well then, did they necessarily create particularly great karma in past lives? Not necessarily. If they encountered a particularly excellent merit field, perhaps through small merit, it could also trigger or attract such results. This is one example. There's another example here. King Prasenajit's fortune was also the result of previously offering warm, saltless food bowls. There are also such accounts. Perhaps the stories differ slightly. In the Breaking of Sangha Events section of the Vinaya, there is a story about King Prasenajit, but this story's account is slightly different. In that text, it says, when Venerable Ananda came to King Prasenajit was very happy. King Prasenajit asked him a question. He said, I am a king, on one hand very meritorious, now having such great wealth. But on the other hand, there are also some quite marvelous and special karmic manifestations. He said, when I often have meals, a plate of fragrant fine rice appears. At that time in India, this was probably like our rice today, and there would be cooked chicken, probably chicken meat, 2 pieces of chicken meat. One often falls to the ground, one stays in the plate. This often happens, and there would also be a stick of sugar cane. This often appears. When Venerable Ananda heard this, he didn't particularly give him an answer. He only said he found it very remarkable. Regarding this matter, when he returned to the Sangha, Venerable Ananda casually told others. After telling others, unknowingly, it gradually reached the world-honored one's ears. The world-honored one then told this karmic connection to the entire Sangha. The world-honored one said, previously there was a person who made offerings to a Pratyeka Buddha. There was an elder who made offerings to a Pratyeka Buddha, rice, chicken meat, and sugar cane. But when he made the offering, 1 chicken fell to the ground. Through this karmic result, in that very life, King Prasenajit actually obtained particularly great merit because at that time, due to the Pratyeka Buddha being so remarkable, he received such results. But the way he made his offering, at that time, some of his food fell to the ground. So now it also often happens. in the manifestation of his merit, this also appears. Therefore, the Buddha required that in the future, anyone, when making offerings to the Sangha, when making offerings to excellent objects, must ensure that the offerings do not fall to the ground. In Tibetan Buddhism, we also often have this practice. For example, when making offerings to the Sangha, when things fall to the ground, we try not to offer them. It seems Han regions are also like this. For example, when eating, when some people are offering meals to certain masters or monastics, unknowingly, spicy tofu falls onto the dining table. When preparing to eat it, everyone around says, "Cannot eat it." Everyone forbids eating it and throws it away. This might be a custom that also aligns with Buddhism's basic principles. Worldly people nowadays say things like, basic principles, fundamental principles, this poor tea smells so good. Just now, we told the story of King Prasenajit. There are many such stories. We don't need to tell them all here. Actually, if one truly has faith in the Buddha and the Sangha, many stories actually help us easily understand our entire merit in this life, including poverty and everything else in this life, should be very easy to understand. Sometimes, although one is relatively poor, but if you offer all the wealth you possess to others, there is also great merit. Of course, encountering an excellent merit field is very important. I remember in the Sutra of Parables, there was a patron named Sudatta. He was extremely poor. He and his wife basically lived like beggars. Their whole life was particularly poor. Later, once they found a piece of wood in a dung bucket. As it turned out, this wood was sandalwood, Indian. Sandalwood was very expensive before, and is still quite expensive now. At that time they sold it and obtained 4 measures of rice. They were very happy. They said, "Now, temporarily, we have no problem with eating." The husband said, "I'll buy some vegetables, you cook the rice well." At this time, the Buddha used his wisdom to observe and knew the conditions for liberating them had matured. Then he first sent Shariputra. Just as she had finished cooking 1 measure of rice, he sent Shariputra. When the wife saw his majestic form, she offered everything. Then she began to prepare again. Originally there were 4 measures of rice. Then she began cooking the second measure. As she was cooking, the Buddha again arranged for Maudgalyayana to come. When the wife saw him, she again developed faith and made offerings. When she was cooking the 3rd measure of rice, the Buddha again sent Venerable Kashyapa. After Venerable Kashyapa came, this person was probably very devout. Otherwise, we worldly people might start cursing. Who knows? Then she again made offerings to him. Later she thought, if they come one more time, I probably couldn't bear it. If these Shravaka disciples come, I won't make offerings. Otherwise, when my husband finds out, he might be particularly angry. He might also arrive soon. At this time the Buddha personally came. After the Buddha personally came, when she looked, his form was even more majestic than the Shravakas. She really couldn't help but develop faith, then offered all 4 measures of rice. After making the offerings, after a while the husband came. After the husband came, the wife was particularly afraid. At first she didn't dare tell him. She said, "We now have such good merit." Buddha, Shariputra, Maudgalyayana, they came to the city to collect alms. This is a very good opportunity. She didn't dare say it directly. At this time, Sudatta was also particularly devout. He said, "If they came, then we should make good offerings." At this time, she said, "I have already finished making offerings, completely finished offering everything." Her husband was also very joyful. Later, through this connection, in that very lifetime, treasures also appeared in their home. They had abundant wealth and favorable conditions. Then they used this wealth to make offerings to the Sangha and the 3 jewels. Throughout their lives, they also attained the sacred path. There are also such stories. In our other sutras and treatises, there are often some examples. If one's heart is truly sincere and encounters a particularly good merit field, of course the merit is particularly great. But now many of us, when we sometimes want to make offerings, when making offerings, it's indeed best to observe first. If we don't observe just because others say he is so-and-so particularly amazing and we offer many of our most precious and valuable things, even when we don't have much money at home, we offer everything. After some time we develop regret and learn about this person's faults. Then this is very bad. the Buddha's disciples in the past, until the very end, indeed, would not do things that cause people to develop wrong views. There couldn't possibly be any bad news. But people nowadays are indeed hard to say, though now it's not that there are no saints like Maudgalyayana and Shariputra. At that time, when Buddhism was in its fruition period, such truly accomplished people are not certain to exist now. But indeed, in today's world there are some spiritual teachers, but are they spiritual teachers or not? We still need to observe, for at least some period of time, Buddhist sutras and treatises all teach this way. Otherwise, if we don't have time to observe and hastily rush like a hungry dog encountering fat meat, immediately going to make connections. After making connections, we also feel uncomfortable in our hearts, or later we often slander Buddhism. These are all unnecessary things, so making offerings indeed has great merit, especially when encountering particularly excellent objects, whether ancient people or people now. There are indeed some that we can also feel. This is through such connections that one can possess wealth. There should be many such connections that will appear, but in this regard we probably also need some wisdom. This is one principle. Next it says, when Venerable Atisha first came, actually ordinary merit doesn't require particularly great accumulation. When Venerable Atisha came, at that time, the entire Tibetan region was much more prosperous than now, yet the master said Tibetan areas had truly become a hungry ghost world. In Tibetan areas, there wasn't even one person who could enjoy the karmic reward of having once offered a measure of barley to pure merit fields. Originally at that time, looking at Tibetan history, compared to now, Patrul Rinpoche should have been in the 19th century. At that time, the entire economic situation of Tibetan areas should have been good before. But in Venerable Atisha's eyes, he saw Tibetan areas like a hungry ghost world. Actually, at that time, perhaps why did Venerable Atisha say this? Because at that time, you might also remember, when Venerable Atisha came to Tibetan areas, at that time, Gyatson Seng and others, didn't they send many people one after another? Later, Lama Yeshe Ö, for the invitation of Venerable Atisha, sacrificed his own body. He had already passed away in prison. Gold was taken to India to make offerings. At first, Venerable Atisha was unwilling to come. Later, Gyatson Seng and others said, our Tibetan region actually has particularly poor economic conditions, like a hungry ghost world. For us to produce so much gold is extremely difficult, although you are not attached to gold, but to demonstrate the preciousness of Buddhism and the value of Panditas, we still make offerings to you. For us to gather so much gold is extremely difficult. You must come. At that time they requested like this, I think, because when Venerable Atisha first had contact with these people, their language made a deep impression. After coming to Tibetan areas, he always said it was like a hungry ghost world. Actually, at that time, it indeed might have been so. But I think India's economic situation may not have been that good either. If we debate region by region, Venerable Atisha came to Tibetan areas in 1041. He came at that time I also mentioned before. At first he was India's national treasure master. The king would not permit him to come to Tibetan areas. Later, he could only travel in the form of pilgrimage tourism. First to Nepal, it seems he stayed with Padmaprabha for a while. Then he came to Tibetan areas. When he first arrived in Tibetan areas in the Ngari region, at that time Tibetan areas no longer had a unified king. In the earlier propagation period, Tibetan areas had successive generations of kings. By the later propagation period, all of Amdo, Kham, and central and southern Han regions had completely dispersed. King Jangchub-e was the king of the Ngari region. At that time, King Jangchub-e invited him to the monastery. Translator Rinchen Zangpo was already in his 80s when they met, so at that time, at King Jangchub-yu's request, he composed Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. Why is it called Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment? Because King Jangchub-yu requested it. There's also such an account. Originally, when he was preparing to come to Tibetan areas, Gyatson Seng passed away in Nepal. Venerable Atisha said, now there's no point in my coming, because my translator, though he was very wise at that time, but he didn't understand Tibetan, so I could only rely on translation the best translator had already when in Nepal, because Gyatson Seng had made several trips up and down, going several times. At that time, Lama Yeshe O had gone there before he passed away. Later he died. After he died, he was particularly sad. My tongue is gone. Now coming to Tibetan areas can't benefit sentient beings either. My tongue is cut off. There's no way to benefit sentient beings. But later, fortunately, translator Rinchen Zangpo, and there was one other. Only these two remained. Originally, 21 people went to invite him. Only these two remained. At first, translator Rinchen Zangpo was particularly... We also discussed this experience before. Then relying on translator Rinchen Zangpo and Venerable Atisha. At that time, they also translated many sutras and treatises. Originally, Venerable Atisha planned to stay in Tibetan areas for 3 years. He himself initially planned for 3 years. When approaching 3 years, Venerable Dromtonpa came up from the Lhasa area. Venerable Dromtonpa found ways to tell Venerable Atisha many things about the merits of Sami, the merits of Lhasa, how wonderful they were. Venerable Dromtonpa was a layperson who was particularly good at speaking, just like some people in Han regions now who are particularly good at speaking. You must come to our place has this and that, so and so wonderful. Sometimes people's mouths are particularly good at speaking, oh, going there will definitely be like the Pure Land. When you get there, it's not much different. Previously, Khenpo Namdrol from India was particularly good at speaking. He taught us the ornament of clear realization, telling about the monastery in South India, how majestic our Namdroling monastery was, and about the meals. Because all the monks could eat together, how wonderful it was. At that time we were particularly envious. After arriving there, they were still very good to us. Although all of India, good is very good, but India's living conditions indeed. The other day I asked some monastics who came from India, I said, because in the morning there's only one sweet tea, called what, and one something, not pizza, called what. So sometimes not talking about this. At that time, Venerable Dromtonpa kept telling Venerable Atisha, Sami is the first monastery of Tibetan Buddhism, how magnificent it is, and Lhasa, how wonderful it is. Speaking like this, Venerable Atisha generally appeared to particularly trust others. He kept listening. Really? Then what? Venerable Dromtonpa had a purpose, he thought, because after 3 years, in today's terms, the passport expired and he would have to return immediately. At that time, he kept finding ways to get Venerable Atisha to come to this side of Tibetan areas, later through his methods. So Tibetans are very grateful to Venerable Dromtonpa. Why? Because through his eloquence and wisdom, Venerable Atisha finally stayed in the Lhasa area for 10 years. Originally, he would have returned after 3 years, but later he stayed in Tibetan areas for 13 years. It was probably 1054 when he passed away in Nyethang. Actually, Nyethang now has many of Venerable Atisha's relics and blessed items. The other day, Jicheng or someone brought me a prayer bead from a Nyethang tree. Was it you? Who was it? Radreng, right? Radreng is where Dromtonpa was, right? Not Nyethang. Nyethang doesn't have cypress trees, does it? Did you go? You should visit Nyethang once. If you go to Nyethang, you'll develop Bodhicitta, Radreng too. When we taught opening the door of mind training, it described the scenes of Venerable Dromtonpa, so I really want to go. Next time when going to Lhasa, I must visit these two places. Venerable Atisha still said Tibetan areas were a hungry ghost world, but in the end, the old master also lived in the hungry ghost world for 13 years, liberating sentient beings. The meaning is that in Tibetan areas, there wasn't even one person who could enjoy the merit of having offered a measure of grain to pure merit fields. It was like this at that time. However, some people ask, why is Tibetan so poor? Don't Tibetan areas believe in Buddhism, yet so poor? Actually, regarding wealth, I personally believe having wealth doesn't necessarily mean having merit. The key is whether this person can truly practice virtue, because for many practitioners, after having wealth, their minds become distracted. So now many people particularly value their traditional culture and religion, truly spiritual wealth. So having, for example, economic wealth, whether true merit can actually be balanced. There are still certain difficulties. I think the country of Bhutan now basically doesn't want to open up. It seems to stay there one day, costs perhaps $100 or how much. They require this. Why? All countries in the world are opening up. Some people think they're very conservative, but they are trying to protect their traditional spiritual values from being impacted by foreign garbage thoughts. They have such a purpose. So sometimes our human values differ. Many of us now think having merit means having money. Having inner wisdom may not necessarily be someone with merit. Actually, for humans to truly possess inner spirit and inner happiness, this is very important. Therefore, from this perspective, we should be able to say this. But from another perspective, what each sentient being enjoys, environmental results, enjoyment results, dominant results, there are also many, indeed in Tibetan areas, there are also some economic deficiencies. This might be the manifestation of karmic results from not creating merit in the past. We can also say this, and looking from another side, although economic wealth is not abundant, but indeed the environment. These may be difficult to match in today's world, including our fresh air, blue skies and white clouds, and many natural clear waters and so forth. Now, many places, including Western countries, have suffered pollution to varying degrees. Therefore, we may have different ways of understanding values. This is what I think next it says. The reason some people find the meager wealth and status before their eyes rare and extraordinary has 3 reasons. The first reason is being ignorant and having limited experience because they themselves haven't seen any wealthy people and haven't seen in the history of ancient and modern times how wealthy people have been. This is one reason. The second reason is being overly attached to this life. When we are particularly attached, didn't I tell you the other day, in the 1970s in my village, in my hometown, it seems the entire township bought one bicycle at that time. Once during a festival, many people went to take photos by the bicycle because they couldn't buy bicycles themselves. But taking photos by the bicycle, getting a photo, they thought they really had the money to buy a bicycle. Being particularly attached to this life, also at that time, our entire commune bought one Dongfeng tractor. Many people also went to take photos by the Dongfeng tractor, thinking they were really going to drive the Dongfeng tractor. When being particularly attached to this life, our attachment today should be tomorrow's dream. I always think this way. This is the reason for excessive grasping. There's another reason, not thoroughly understanding what was mentioned before about the fruits of the worry-free tree and other pith instructions, the law of cause and effect, or understanding but not truly having faith. This is related to these 3 reasons. If we truly have unshakable faith in cause and effect, when we see some wealthy people, when we see some world-famous leaders and celebrities, for example, with millions or tens of millions of people cheering for them, this is nothing special, perhaps just temporary conditions. They have some skillful means to attract current attention. After some time, when they die, it's still exactly the same, whether cremation or water burial. At that time, you're still a body of flesh and bone. Look at what virtuous deeds accompany your soul. Without virtuous deeds, it's just creating karma, nothing special. When many current celebrities and leaders leave this world, what kind of tragic scenes they face, everyone is very clear about this. So these Vajra words spoken by Patrul Rinpoche are indeed particularly vivid. Therefore, if genuine renunciation truly arises in our mind stream, then those we see in this present world, who are wealthy as dragon kings, high as the sky, fierce as lightning, beautiful as rainbows, we will certainly recognize that these have not even a sesame seed's worth of permanence or stability, and will inevitably feel disgusted and weary, like a person with liver disease seeing greasy food, feeling nauseous and disgusted. If we truly long for the transcendent in our mind stream and develop genuine renunciation toward the worldly, many people say, "Please bless me, bless me." May I develop genuine bodhicitta, genuine renunciation. If it's truly genuine renunciation, then those we see now, who are extremely wealthy like dragon kings, with particularly high status, beyond the heavens, high as the sky can also be said to be a metaphor for something particularly high, these people with particularly high status. and those particularly fierce ones, like lightning that no one can resist, and whether male or female, particularly beautiful ones, like rainbows. People particularly love rainbows. Such people will certainly be seen this way. You see, if you truly have renunciation, whether wealthy, particularly attractive, or having status in our world, people generally particularly envy such people. When seeing these people, you feel and immediately recognize that these don't have even a sesame seed's worth of permanence and stability. Instead, like someone with liver disease wanting to vomit when seeing greasy food. So those who truly develop renunciation in their mind stream have nothing to feel envious about form, caste, wealth, and all pleasurable things should be taught in the Sutra of the Right Mindfulness of Dharma. All are impermanent. The wise should not trust them. I seem to have used this before. Whether your caste is noble, wealth is complete, or you possess various pleasurable things. Actually, everything is impermanent. Nothing is reliable, nothing dependable, nothing stable. Venerable Jigme Gyalwai Nyugu also said, when he saw the wealthiest and most talented in the world, he never developed even a moment's envy. Didn't we already quote this before? At that time, Patrul Rinpoche said, his teacher indeed had no attachment to worldly dharmas. Perhaps these people outwardly appear to have wealth and merit, but actually have not the slightest attachment. In their state of realization, we can say gold is like cow dung. In the Sutra of 100 Actions, it often says, viewing gold and earth equally, free from sorrow and worry in right conduct. The snake of afflictions cannot bite such a one. They attain immeasurable happiness. This also seems to be taught in the Sutra of the Right Mindfulness of Dharma. True wise ones see money and dirt as exactly the same. They absolutely won't have worldly worries. They always act with mindfulness and awareness. Such people won't be bitten by the poisonous snakes of worldly greed, anger, and ignorance, various afflictions. They always remain in a state of particular happiness. Many people can achieve this when truly developing genuine renunciation. But we now have certain difficulties. Only when accumulating merit, we still need to accumulate illusory merit like a dream. Still needs to be accumulated, definitely must be accumulated, but we have no need to be overly attached to any worldly phenomena. Otherwise, sometimes when we interact with worldly people, worldly people are particularly attached to all phenomena, it's particularly pitiable. Of course, diligently accumulating merit for this life's material fulfillment for ordinary worldly people could barely be considered acceptable, but it doesn't touch the edge of the transcendent. Some people have no connection to the transcendent at all. Why do we say this? Because if one is a true practitioner who seeks the fruit of liberation, one must, as we have repeatedly emphasized before, achieve abandonment of all attachment to worldly phenomena, like spitting out saliva, abandoning all worldly attachments. True practitioners need to be like this. We also discussed before that worldly and transcendent dharmas achieving both with one action is very difficult. One should leave home and village, go to distant places relying only on quiet places. When afflicted with illness, face it optimistically. When death approaches, face it calmly while diligently practicing dharma. If one is truly a good practitioner, let go of all worldly attachments completely, then go to quiet places, places where there are spiritual guides to rely on, and the time of reliance shouldn't be just 1 or 2 days, then staying 1 or 2 days without learning anything, developing afflictions and leaving. This won't work. Finally, in one's life, whether encountering adverse conditions or illness, face everything optimistically at the very end, like Milarepa. Even when death comes upon you, have the courage to face it. Actually, true practitioners, whether illness or death or in their thoughts, any kind of adverse conditions and obstacles, they still face them calmly. When practice reaches a certain level, it becomes like this. Moreover, each of us knows what kind of structure our body has, knowing that of all people in the world, there's not one who doesn't die. In the end, we still must face birth, aging, sickness, and death. So knowing this situation, as true practitioners, we should have the spirit and courage to face it. In our academy, There are many who were very successful in higher education, should be considered very successful in worldly terms, whether studying abroad in various countries or working in organizations that people particularly envy, abandoning worldly dharmas to become monastics. Many people don't understand, but I think some people who truly understand the faults of birth, aging, sickness, and death in human life must face these sooner or later. So practicing in advance is not at all regrettable from a long-term perspective. Indeed, many people choose this path, absolutely, truly, we can say this. Of course, some temporary worldly people are particularly, just as Patrul Rinpoche said, particularly attached to worldly dharmas, people with limited knowledge and those who may not quite believe in cause and effect, not quite believe in past and future lives. Such people don't understand, and this is very understandable. Their not understanding is very understandable. This phrase is very good. Not understanding is understanding. Poetics specifically uses these people who have studied poetics are different. A disciple once asked peerless Khenpo Rinpoche, "In today's degenerate age, for a practitioner of the true Dharma, it's very difficult to obtain clothing and food provisions. Should we practice wealth deity methods or practice longevity arts? Or simply walk toward inevitable death, which would be best?" Before Khenpo Rinpoche, he also raised some questions. Actually, previously there were works like the Father and Son teachings and disciple question and answer records. Many question and answer records. Current worldly people also have many doubts. I often encounter this, whether in intellectual circles or before some political figures. When they have questions, sometimes I may not answer very well. But I still hope to let them ask. This is better. Many Dharma friends here present in the future when propagating Buddhism, and in daily life, I think having some interaction with others is better. In the process of interaction, what seems to us like a particularly simple sentence, a particularly simple principle, but for others it remains in their hearts for a very long time, always needing to be resolved doubts. So at that time, Khenpo Rinpoche's disciple also asked him, "In this degenerate age, earning money is particularly difficult. Life is also very difficult. I am particularly poor. Either I practice a wealth deity method or practice longevity arts." Longevity arts are what we often call alchemical arts. We've discussed this before. Indeed, I mentioned before that in the 80s, there were some monastics in the Danba area. They practiced according to Terton, Dorje Dechen Lingpa's alchemical arts methods. Later, for half a month, 1 month they didn't eat. This situation indeed exists. Now, Tibetan areas have such practices. So before Khenpo, he said, "Should we practice wealth deities or practice instructions for not eating, or simply, unable to earn money, starve to death and head toward death? This person may have become extreme." At that time, Khenpo Master said, even if practicing wealth deity methods, but if there are no karmic results from past generosity, it's also difficult to achieve the goal. Moreover, for those in their hearts who want to practice according to Dharma, practicing wealth deity methods for this life's benefit is also quite contradictory. For a true practitioner, practicing wealth deities as the main focus is not very good. However, many people now particularly like this. Many people tell me to teach everyone wealth deity methods. If it's wealth deity methods, many people will come and offer much money. If they have money, they don't need wealth deities. If they already have money, there's no need to teach them again. Sometimes I jokingly say this. Khenpo Master's answer to the first question was like this. Then his answer to the second question said, longevity arts are the same. In prosperous ancient times, when the nutrients of earth, stone, water, and wood were abundant, at that time it was easier to accomplish. But now, when nutrients have been exhausted, practicing longevity arts cannot immediately bring benefits either. The third question, walking toward inevitable death, is also unreasonable. This is also unnecessary. Such a precious human life with freedoms and advantages is also very rare. However, if deep in one's heart one truly develops the attitude that death or no death doesn't matter, I must practice, if this truly arises in your heart, then you will never lack clothing and food. Many of us can see this from life experience. There has never been a precedent of practitioners starving to death. The world-honored one also said, even if there occurs a famine where 1 measure of pearls is exchanged for 1 measure of flour, the Buddha's followers will not lack clothing and food. So indeed many of us, especially practitioners, I feel that, for example, in a practice center of several thousand people, generally true practitioners don't spend every day earning money for livelihood. Unknowingly, relying on the 3 jewels blessings, everything can be obtained. Of course, as monastics, perhaps for livelihood. Ancient and modern, East and West, no matter what, there will be no lack. The treatise on the great perfection of wisdom also says, monastics may suffer in this life, but receive blessings and attain the path in future lives. Householders may enjoy this life, but suffer in future lives. Monastics outwardly may have ascetic practices in this life, but in future lives will experience joyful results, while householders in this life may appear to have everything, but actually create relatively few virtuous actions. In future lives they will experience relatively more suffering. Monastics outwardly may have some ascetic practices, but actually encountering particularly great suffering or starving to death. These absolutely will not happen. Therefore, if we think about practicing and creating merit, we won't enter particularly terrible places, won't reach such states. Moreover, truly wise people still practice virtue, unwilling to create negative karma for the sake of livelihood. The Dharani Samukaya Sutra also says, better to be poor and lowly while practicing virtuous dharmas than to be wealthy and noble while committing evil karma. This means it's better to be poor while practicing virtuous dharmas. This is very meaningful for all lifetimes, rather than entering into being both wealthy and creating negative karma. Some of us might think, for example, although creating negative karma but making money, is this acceptable? But as practitioners, this cannot be approved indeed. In this brief human life, even if life encounters some difficulties, we should not create negative karma. This is a basic principle. Here, it also teaches that all Buddha's children and bodhisattvas accumulate merit and purify obscurations, all for benefiting sentient beings who fill the expanse of space, not to mention accomplishing one's worldly benefits, even if seeking perfect Buddhahood for one's own benefit. This also doesn't belong to the Mahayana path. As true Mahayana Buddha's children, we think for the benefit of sentient beings if a person seeks Buddhahood for themselves. Actually, this cannot enter the ranks of Mahayana. Everyone should remember this point. Many of us indeed have particularly heavy, selfish minds. If you want to be reborn in the Pure Land, it's just, I want to be reborn, not considering sentient beings as anything important, whether practice or diligence. Why, in all our Buddhist teachings, beginning, end, and middle, all must speak of benefiting sentient beings. This is the most fundamental issue of Mahayana Buddhism. If this fundamental thing is abandoned, we have already lost the essence of Mahayana Dharma. So this point, even if at the beginning completely genuine bodhicitta may not arise, but if we think again and again, mind is after all a conditioned phenomenon. At the beginning you may not understand. Gradually, oh, when I recite King of Aspiration prayers, it's still for all sentient beings. Such brief thoughts, gradually indeed in your conduct, can develop bodhicitta. Many of our Dharma friends, when they first came, had particularly heavy selfish minds. Later, whether in dedication or many behaviors, you can see this person, as long as it benefits sentient beings, is willing to contribute. This is the Mahayana motivation. So whether accumulating merit or purifying negative karma, all must be for the benefit of all sentient beings, absolutely cannot mix in selfish minds. Not mixing any at all is impossible for us ordinary beings, but trying our best to restrain this is extremely important. If practicing in this way, then one's own benefit and this life's happiness and joy will be naturally obtained without seeking, actually when truly benefiting sentient beings your own. For example, when we dedicate ourselves for sentient beings, when we do things for sentient beings, Your own practice and many merits naturally come about. So for us, including some dedicated workers here in our academy, we now have some technical dedicated workers, some from higher education institutions, should be said to be people with certain qualifications dedicating themselves. Some people tell me, it's such a pity for them to dedicate like this. I say, it's not a pity. If they were in the worldly realm, they might just be ordinary people. Here, through their wisdom and their dedication, they directly or indirectly benefit many sentient beings. For them, this is not any kind of delay. For me, I'm also not harming others. For example, certain dedicated workers in our academy. In which department? This department, that department. Actually, if this department truly involves benefiting sentient beings, for each person, it's not that dedication creates some burden for you, but the key thing for everyone to remember, whatever dedication you make, you still need to have some kind of dedication. At the beginning, for example, if I dedicate myself in a hospital today, my dedication in the hospital is for the sake of sentient beings. When I go, I think like this. When getting off work, I think, I dedicate everything I did today to all sentient beings. Any other department's dedication, if it has such an attitude, I think all these should be included. If you don't have such a mindset, even if you do meditation every day, study, contemplate, and practice every day sit on the Dharma seat talking eloquently to others, blah blah blah, talking like me. But if in your heart you don't have Bodhicitta, you may not even have Hinayana virtue roots. So I think dedicating is not important. Generating the mind is important. A guide to the words of my perfect teacher also quotes, dedicating is not essential. Generating the mind is key. This means we're all dedicating on the surface. But actually, whether you've generated this mind, if you've generated this mind, even if every day you're cleaning toilets in a place that has never had any Buddhism, actually you truly are performing Bodhisattva conduct. Dedicating virtue roots is the same. If practicing in this way, then this life's happiness will naturally be obtained without seeking. Just like when lighting a fire, smoke naturally arises. Planting barley, seedlings naturally grow. For this reason, we must abandon like poison the pursuit of selfishness and this life concerns. We must abandon this as taught in Song of Victory. Good, today we'll stop here.
Jupun Solen Droa Droa Sho Bandangara Badna Asagordo Bandangara Badna Asagordo Bandangara Badna Asagordo